The war in Ukraine is a tragedy. It is a tragedy for the people of Ukraine, who have suffered immensely from the violence. It is a tragedy for the people of Russia, who are paying the price for the Kremlin's aggression. And it is a tragedy for the international order, which has been shaken to its core. This conflict is not just about Ukraine, it is about the future of Europe. It is about the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, and it is about the right of every nation to choose its own destiny. The world is watching this conflict closely. The stakes are high. The outcome will have profound implications for all of us. It is essential to understand the historical context of this conflict. We must also be aware of the latest developments on the ground, and we must be prepared for the long road ahead. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 had a profound impact on the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine, with its fertile lands and industrial base, had been a vital part of the Soviet economy. Its independence was a major blow to Russia's prestige and power. The status of Crimea, a peninsula on the Black Sea with a majority Russian population, became a source of tension between the two countries. Russia maintained a naval base at Sevastopol, Crimea, which gave it strategic access to the Black Sea. In 2014, following a popular uprising in Ukraine that ousted the pro-Russian president Viktor Yanukovych, Russia invaded and annexed Crimea. This move was widely condemned by the international community as a violation of international law. The annexation of Crimea marked a turning point in the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. It also signaled Russia's willingness to use military force to achieve its objectives in the region. The Euromaidan protests, which began in late 2013, were a series of demonstrations and civil unrest in Ukraine. The protests were sparked by the Ukrainian government's decision to suspend preparations for implementing an association agreement with the European Union. Instead, the government pursued closer economic ties with Russia. The protests, which quickly escalated into calls for the resignation of President Yanukovych and his government, were met with a violent crackdown by security forces. The violence culminated in the deaths of over 100 protesters, known as the Heavenly Hundred. In the aftermath of the Euromaidan protests, Russia seized the opportunity to further destabilize Ukraine. Using a combination of covert operations and overt military support, Russia fomented separatist movements in the eastern Ukrainian regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, collectively known as the Donbas. The conflict in the Donbas escalated into a full-blown war between Ukrainian government forces and Russian-backed separatists. The war has claimed the lives of over 14,000 people and displaced millions more. On February 24, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The invasion, which came after months of military buildup on Ukraine's borders, marked a significant escalation of the conflict. Russian President Vladimir Putin justified the invasion as a special military operation aimed at demilitarizing and denazifying Ukraine, claims widely dismissed by the international community as baseless pretexts. Putin's stated objectives were to protect Russian-speaking populations in Ukraine, prevent Ukraine from joining NATO, and to counter what he perceived as a growing Western threat to Russia's security. However, the scale and brutality of the invasion suggested a broader ambition to subjugate Ukraine and restore it to Russia's sphere of influence. The invasion sparked widespread international condemnation and triggered a wave of sanctions against Russia. It also prompted a surge of military aid to Ukraine from Western countries, significantly bolstering Ukraine's defense capabilities. Section 5. Global Response, Sanctions, Aid and Condemnation. The international community's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine was swift and multifaceted. The United States, the European Union and their allies imposed unprecedented sanctions on Russia, targeting its financial system, energy sector, and key industries. These sanctions aimed to cripple the Russian economy and pressure Putin to change course. In addition to sanctions, Western countries provided billions of dollars worth of military aid to Ukraine, including weapons, ammunition, and intelligence support. This assistance proved crucial in enabling Ukraine to resist the Russian invasion and inflict heavy losses on Russian forces. The invasion also triggered a global outpouring of support for Ukraine, with people around the world condemning Russia's actions and expressing solidarity with the Ukrainian people. Numerous countries, international organizations, and civil society groups mobilized humanitarian aid to assist Ukraine in coping with the devastating consequences of the war. Section 6. Humanitarian crisis, displacement, suffering, and global impact. The war in Ukraine has triggered a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced from their homes, fleeing to safer parts of the country or seeking refuge in neighboring countries, primarily Poland, Romania, and Moldova. The influx of refugees has strained the resources of host countries and created an unprecedented humanitarian challenge for Europe. The war has also resulted in widespread suffering and loss of life. Thousands of civilians have been killed and many more have been injured. The fighting has destroyed critical infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, and homes, leaving millions without access to essential services. The conflict has had far-reaching global consequences, disrupting supply chains, exacerbating food insecurity, and fueling inflation. Ukraine, a major agricultural producer, has seen its exports of grain and other commodities severely disrupted, threatening food shortages in vulnerable countries that rely on Ukrainian imports. Section 7. The fog of war, shifting front lines, and military developments. The war in Ukraine has been characterized by its fluidity and unpredictability. After an initial phase marked by rapid Russian advances, the conflict settled into a grinding war of attrition. Both sides have suffered heavy losses and the front lines have shifted back and forth. Russia's initial attempt to capture the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, was met with fierce resistance from Ukrainian forces and ultimately failed. Russia then shifted its focus to the eastern Donbas region, where it made some territorial gains, but at a high cost. Ukraine, for its part, has mounted a spirited defense, effectively using its knowledge of the terrain and Western-supplied weapon systems to inflict heavy losses on Russian forces. The use of drones, anti-tank missiles, and sophisticated artillery systems has proved particularly effective in slowing down and, in some cases, repelling Russian advances. Section 8. International implications, geopolitics, and the global order. The war in Ukraine has had profound geopolitical implications, reshaping alliances, testing international institutions, and raising fundamental questions about the future of the global order. The conflict has exposed the limitations of international organizations, such as the United Nations, in preventing and resolving conflicts involving permanent members of the Security Council. The war has also highlighted the growing divide between Russia and the West, with each side accusing the other of undermining international security and violating international law. The conflict has led to a renewed focus on NATO, with Finland and Sweden abandoning their traditional neutrality to join the alliance in response to Russia's aggression. The war has also underscored the importance of energy security, as Russia has used its role as a major energy supplier to Europe as leverage in the conflict. This has prompted European countries to accelerate their efforts to diversify their energy sources and reduce their dependence on Russian gas. Section 9. The uncertain future, potential scenarios, and paths to peace. As the war in Ukraine grinds on, its ultimate outcome remains uncertain. Several potential scenarios could unfold, ranging from a negotiated settlement to a protracted stalemate to a further escalation of the conflict. A negotiated settlement would require both sides to make significant concessions, something that seems unlikely at present given the deep mistrust and divergent objectives. Russia has shown little willingness to compromise on its core demands, while Ukraine remains determined to liberate all its occupied territories. A protracted stalemate, with neither side able to achieve a decisive military victory, is another possibility. This scenario could result in a frozen conflict, with ongoing low-level fighting and a heavy human and economic toll. A further escalation of the conflict, potentially involving the use of chemical or even nuclear weapons, is a worst-case scenario that cannot be ruled out. Such an escalation would have catastrophic consequences, not only for Ukraine and Russia, but also for the wider world. The international community must continue to explore all avenues for diplomacy and dialogue to prevent such a disastrous outcome and work towards a just and lasting peace in Ukraine.